Um, I know so many of you here, and it's kind of fun to come back every year and see all these familiar faces. Some of you I don't know, but most of you, this is like a family fellowship. So I'm excited to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you again about something Karen has asked me to talk about, which is the importance of arts in education. And of course, that's near and dear to my heart since I am a practicing artist. And so I do feel like it's really important. And, we've seen, and thanks, Rick, for encouraging me that God can put the right words through me. I'd like to let me just do that, and let me ask God to just do that. So I say the things that are meaningful and pertinent to you. Lord, today, just thank you for these opportunities to fellowship, to be together, to build each other up, to encourage. I ask that you bring the message through to your people so that it's helpful to them and true to your word. In Jesus' name, amen. So, speaking is not one of my natural gifts. Me and Jeremiah. Me and Moses. And really, I'm not even a linear thinker. So, my mind is a little bit more like a tornado. It like spins around, collects all this stuff until it can finally land on a point. So, but that being said, I've had fun kind of putting together some ideas and some thoughts that we can discuss today. And I'm hoping that I can kind of use God's approach, which is to reveal in the natural first and then the spiritual second. So with that being said, I'm going to include for you guys an actual activities to help you take home some of the principles that I'm going to show you or reveal that I think are really important. Education today has worked very hard at squeezing out the arts and minimizing and diminishing them, and yet we look at our culture and it's full of images and music, and it's unfortunately godless. And it's taking our society in a direction that is godless, and it's deconstructing humanity and civilizations. And so we realize that the arts are extremely powerful in our world today because we're created with senses, and everything is revealed to us through our sensory systems. And so we have the opportunity to either use those things for God or not. And as Christians, and especially in Christian schools and classical Christian schools, we really want to encourage, I believe it's pertinent, it's absolutely mandatory that we include the arts. And I'm going to give you some thoughts about that, both theologically, and which Rick has already actually hit on a number of them in his talk, and also practically. And so that when you go back to your places and your schools, you can think about ways that those things are being encouraged. So the arts, just by definition, I'm going to kind of really narrow down the terminology to say that arts are the act of making, creating and making, okay? And so they can be included in all of our activities of life, right? From being an architect or an artist or a musician or a dancer or even in the everyday creativity of our life. I mean, down to cooking and cleaning, whatever we do, teaching. Those are all creative things that we do and in order to make something, right? So we're just going to make it that narrow, of a summary, just keep it very simple, the act of creating and making. So I think there's some theological reasons, practical reasons for making the art a must in the whole of education. But instead of just telling you straight up some of them, we're gonna do an activity. And so in front of you, I passed out some paper, and I'm gonna allow you to doodle if you want while I talk, because it actually helps you remember things better. But first, I'm gonna ask you to take not even 5 minutes, 3 minutes, and I know you don't think you're all artists, but what I want you to draw is whatever comes to your mind. You've got 3 minutes. Go. And just use your pen or whatever. Just whatever comes to mind. It doesn't have to be a work of art. It just has to be a drawing. You can look up when you think you're about done. Okay, so I'd like for you to share. You don't have to show your picture, but I would like for you to raise your hand and share what you drew.
So I did a really cute little snail.
Snail. Doug, what'd you draw? A book. Karen, what'd you draw?
Well, I drew a seed that grew into a tree that put out more seeds because I feel that's what's happening to me.
Julie, you did a tree.
I did a palm tree.
You did a tree. Anybody else do a tree?
So many trees.
Wow.
I did because I was looking at it.
Okay. What else did you guys draw? Anybody draw flowers? Ooh, lots of flowers. Anybody draw houses?
Birdhouses.
Kyla, what'd you draw?
I drew a chain with one break in it.
Cool, creative. All right, so the point of doing this little quick exercise is to discuss a little bit of the theological perspective on art. And that is to say that we reproduce what we imagine or see and what is familiar to us and what we love and focus our attention on. So think about that just for a minute. If we haven't seen it, we generally have a harder time imagining it, don't we? So we fill our imaginations with images and things that we see all the time. The more we see something repeatedly, the more we grow to love it. And in the art room, one of the techniques that we use to correct that is like if you're drawing a picture of yourself or a picture of a person, and you start working on it and you focus on it and you're up close to it and you're thinking about it, and all of a sudden you're like, what is wrong with this picture? It's not correct. Well, so what you do is you get a mirror and you look at the image in the mirror, and what you see what you see in the mirror will reveal what's incorrect in your drawing. It's a very clever thing to do, but it works. Sometimes artists will take the drawing and turn it upside down, and they're able to see it from a different perspective. But, but theologically speaking, we were created in Genesis in the image of God. And in that creation, we were created to be creative. And, and that creativity allows us to work alongside God as co-creators into eternity for His good and for His purposes. And so I wrote this better than I'm speaking now, I'm sure. But, I just think it's fundamental because we are creative beings, because we're created in the image of God. And we're created to be creative people and to produce with our creativity. So, you know, I think about it this way. When this exercise we just did, the first thing y'all did, I know, is exactly what God did. He imagined what He might do, what He might create. So first we imagine, right? Then He designed it, and then He created it. And the world and everything in it is the manifestation of God's imagination, His thoughts, His work, and what He loves, which is us. And Rick spoke about that. We were born, we were created out of love. And we do the same thing when we create. So in that way, we really are very much made in the image of God, because we actually follow that same process in our own creating. And Genesis goes further in describing that when it came to man, he doesn't describe this earlier in creation, but when it came to man, it says that it described it as He formed man out of the dust of the earth. So He used a different word, and Rick, you might be able to help me with the theology of the wording, but it's not the same word form as it was create. The word create is really, I think, in Hebrew often described as sung into existence. But when it came to man, He formed man out of the dust of the earth, and then He breathed life into him. And then when it comes to Eve, what did He do? He did first surgery. He takes the rib out of Adam, puts him to sleep first, takes the rib out, and He creates Eve out of Adam's rib. And I was talking to DC, my husband, about this, and I was like, I said, yeah, I wonder why God used the rib. He goes, well, you know, there's some things about the rib you should know. I said, well, what is that? He said, well, the rib contains all the elements necessary for life in one rib. It includes the vein, the artery, the nerves, the muscles, the bone, the marrow, which contains the blood cells and the DNA. I didn't know that, but it takes a good surgeon to tell me that. And the point of bringing this up is that God created all things out of Himself, because He's completely self-sufficient. But when it came to man, He showed that He could work that He worked within the parameters of Himself. Does that make sense? To form man out of what He had already created, the dirt, the dust. And He gives us parameters, too, on our creation, because what He's given us is complete. It's completely complete, because it's of Him and it is from Him. And it's all of His nature combined into this creative, beautiful world and universe that we live in. And it's very exciting. So, I need my glasses. So to me, that's really important in understanding that it points to God's sufficiency in everything and in all creation, and also his sufficiency for us as human beings. And I just think that's super exciting because, it's in him and through him that he holds all things together, and nothing can exist or be created outside of him. And what we see happening in our culture is we want to create, people want to create and leave God out, and it isn't possible. And it isn't what we are called to do as his people. And so it's super important that we think about how our society, is doing that, and how we're living in the deconstruction, like I said, of humanity and of humans and of culture and of society as a whole. And I believe that's the enemy's plan all along, is to deconstruct it all. And so, to wrap this little part up, I think, it's, as believers, it's our responsibility to engage and to pursue and to encourage the arts and the artists that are growing up in our schools and in our churches and in culture at large. Because if we shrink back from it, then Satan has the platform, and he will take over. And we'll see what we're seeing now in society today. I think one of the reasons the churches shrunk back over history from the arts, which were alive in the Renaissance, you remember, and where classical education has come from, was because it led to people worshiping the created instead of the creator. And so the church has pushed back against engaging in the arts per se, instead of going full force into putting truth back into the creations. So that's just our fallen nature to do that. God has warned us not to do that. The 10 Commandments are very clear. We're not to make any images. And what he means by that is not that we don't create, because we're called to create, but that we don't worship what we create, nor do we worship ourselves because we created it. All creation is designed to take us toward God and toward knowing him better. So I guess from a theological point of view, I would say that our calling is to be creators in creation, and that we actually bring glory to God by fulfilling that calling. And it can be in whatever creating and making that you're called to do. As Rick said, not everybody's called to be a pastor, not everybody's called to preach. But that engaging in those activities is creative. It is started in the mind and the imagination. It is started with the truth of who God is. And classical arts, when you study it, that the methodology is to study the master designer's work, which would be nature, what God's done, not other things, and not out of an empty imagination, but to fill our minds and our hearts with the truth of what God does, what his creation, and build off of that. So now, I think the study of the arts is also very practical and should be pursued in the schools because it develops some specific skills necessary for a person to live in truth. It develops some specific skills for a person to live in truth, to have discernment, and to give us a means of expressing and communicating our love for God through beauty and meaningful expression in our physical world and our community with each other. So we don't create in a vacuum, do we? No. No. We create in order to share with the community. That's why we create. And God did the same thing, didn't he? He created the world because he wanted to share it with us. And he wanted to do things with us. He wanted community and fellowship with humanity. That's why he made man the pinnacle of his manifestation of creation, and he breathed life into man in a special way. And so in front of you, we're going to do another little exercise. And this is, I want you to think about this a little bit, because we do need to develop our ability to see and discern, which is what the arts teach us when we study them diligently, to teach us to see and discern more carefully, and thereby seeing truth in more reality. Okay? Which is why there's a movement back towards representational realism in the art world. It's huge. It's a huge movement because people are searching for truth. So here's our lesson. Take the program that you have in front of you, go to the front page. There's a picture on it, so go to the picture page, this one. Okay, I want you to look at that picture, and I would like for you to tell me what colors, or decide in your mind what colors you see in this picture. Raise your hand if you got it. You see black, brown, green, yellow. Okay, so we kind of have an idea of what we think we see, right? Okay, now I want you to take your piece of paper. You can use a separate piece of paper, your blank paper. I want you to fold it in half from top to bottom. Hamburger. Okay, so you're going to fold it like this, top to bottom. Okay, then open it back up, and where the crease is, about 1 or 2 inches in, I want you to take your pen and poke a hole right through it on the crease, 1 or 2 inches over, and just like shove that pencil right through, so it's a pretty, like pencil width hole. Yeah, pencil width hole. Okay, now I want you to make it bigger than that, so your pencil will go through it. Okay, perfect. Good. Now, take your pencil out, and I want you to lay it over this. Lay it on top of this, so it's lined up with it. And I want you to look through that hole that you made and tell me what color you see. Make it a big enough hole so you can see through it. So, can I borrow yours, Doug? So, when you look at this as a whole, you see certain colors in it, right? But when you isolate it, like Doug did here, and you look at that color, your perception of that color is actually more accurate than you would have ever seen it otherwise. Does that make sense? Why? Right. So some of you have said it out loud, and it's because you're able to isolate one component from the rest and analyze it separately. Right? When you study the arts, that is what you are doing. Exercise is extremely important in seeing color, because color in different environments appears completely different than we know. The point that I'm making in this is that our perceptions are not always accurate. Our perceptions of life are not always accurate. Our perceptions and our ideas are not always accurate. And the exercise of studying in this way, of being able to isolate something, analyze it, and then put it in the grander perspective. It's what pastors do. It's when they take a passage apart. It's what artists do when they study an object. It is the process of taking something, isolating it, studying it, and then putting it into context. I mean, when I paint, I'm often just shocked at what color something actually is. If you look back at the front cover of your page, and you put that, look at the pencil on the page, this little pencil. We read that as yellow, correct? That's a yellow pencil. We would say that's a yellow pencil. Kind of a goldish yellow. I mean, we could be more specific. I could be much more specific. But in general, we would say, hey, that's a yellow pencil. That's how we perceive it, as a yellow pencil. But if you put that hole that you just made over the dark side of that pencil, that is not yellow. What color is it? Now, it's in the yellow family, but it is not yellow as we would call yellow. So the chroma would be, I could get technical on you, but the chroma would be yellow. The value would be very low, a low value of that chroma. But it's mixed with some other colors like red and blue, which creates more of a brown. So those are technical things, but the reality is our perception is, oh, we read that as red. So you see kids, they paint an apple all red. Well, it isn't all red if you're going to see it in context of a form. Does that make sense? And we as human beings make presumptions about things that are not within a proper context. It isn't accurate, so therefore it isn't true. It isn't true. And what you're trying to study is what is truth. Does that make sense? So the activity and the training of artists' methods and ways is vitally important for training those methods and ways of knowing and discerning truth. It's the same activity, only applied in different fields. Okay? Okay, so we're going to do another one just for fun. You're going to take your other piece of paper, and I have 2 volunteers who are going to help me with this. Okay, in this activity, you probably have played this game before, but in this activity, they're going to go down the aisle, and you're going to need to look. You're going to have about 10 seconds to look at what they're bringing by on the tray. And then, without seeing it again, you're going to draw on your piece of paper, just flip it over. You're going to draw what you saw. Now, we're not going to name it, we're going to draw it. Okay? So this is an exercise. This is called visual memory, all right? And it's something we had to do a whole lots and lots of it. Because, I mean, just think about this. Artists before cameras, how did they draw galloping horses? How did they draw them? They didn't have a photograph to draw from. They drew from their visual memory of the movement and the study of the horse, right? So this is an exercise, but we're also called to be visually tuned in, all right? So this is an exercise we're going to try. So girls, you walk down, you just stop at each row for like 10 seconds. Y'all look at it, all the items you can see. And then try to draw what you saw visually. Count to 10. We had to do this every single day. Every day. You know, some people are better at this than others, and some people even from birth are better at this than others. They're more visually tuned in. But it's something you can train. It's not graded, so don't worry. Okay. How did you guys do? We're going to let the tray come back down one more time, and you see how close you got. Just for fun. Go slow, girls. Did you forget anything? We all would. It's a lot of fun. Were you close? Good. So what's that?
Can I edit it now?
It won't matter. It's just to make a point. But you can if you want. Well, that's one thing, but there's, so all of you guys who are left brain thinkers probably did this. You probably looked at the tray, panicked, and thought, oh my word, I got to remember all these items. And you thought, okay, there's a salt shaker, and there's a cup, and there's a, right? Like, you named the items, right? Okay. And all you right brain thinkers, what you're actually training in artists is to not think of what the item is, but the shape. So it's kind of an interesting way of seeing. So go back down one more time, girls, and think of it this time, what shapes do you see? Because you can get it really fast then. What are the shapes you see? You guys are getting all the good hints for art school. Okay, guys, what do you, when I told you to look for the shapes, did that change how you saw things a little bit? They're like, no, not really. It did help you remember when you quit thinking of the words and you just look at the shapes. And that is exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to integrate our senses, which is shapes, with our knowledge, right? And work them together to create. Does that make sense? And when you say, well, I'm just going to talk about, we're just going to deal in knowledge, but you leave out the sensory, there's a problem there. One is you get pretty puffed up and you think you know more than you do. And you become legalistic. But God didn't create our world that way. He created it with immense beauty. There's a reason he did that. So he doesn't want us to work in isolation of one way of learning to another, or to diminish beauty and the study, the deliberate study of his creation and the intricacies of his creation, where we gain what is most valuable, which is a deep, deep appreciation for God himself. You cannot go out and look at a sunset. We're drawn to beauty. We long for beauty. You can't go out on look at a sunset and not say, oh, wow, there must be a God. You can't. And not only that, you can't go out and look at a sunset and say, oh, wow, there must be a God. Hey, Lynn, come look at the sunset with me, right? It's meant to be shared. Our work is meant to be shared for the glory of God. And I mean, we even plan entire vacations seeking for beauty, don't we? Like we want to go to the beach. We want to go see the ocean. We want to lay out under the stars, and we want to look at the magnificence. I mean, take Abraham. What did God do? He said, I'm going to give you a promise. But first, come outside with me out into the desert, and I want you to look at the night sky. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. Look at the night sky. It's beauty. Look at the billions of stars that cover the heavenly hosts. And he says, and then he says, I am going to give you this promise, the descendants as many as these stars. Why did he do that? To give Abraham a visual image of this promise that he was going to give him, right? And so visual images, especially when they're founded in creation and in the truth of creation, are our opportunity to draw mankind toward God and not away. Because people can't help it. It's innate. We want beauty. I mean, we pay a lot of money for beauty. Right? We'll give up a whole lot just for a moment. And that's another part of the arts that I think is diminished way too much because we're a utilitarian society. And so we think, well, we create so that we can make money, or we can, or sell something and make a living, or we create so that, it can be utilized in some way. And I don't believe that's totally true. I think it's to be shared, yes, but it's also to be enjoyed for the sheer enjoyment of it. And a great example of this is the woman who had the oil, the fragrant perfume. And what did the disciples said? The people in the room, they were like, oh my gosh, she dumped out her whole thing and it was worth a lot of money. We could have sold that and we could have given the money to the poor. It could have been a good utility for that fragrance. But what is fragrance made for? For the aroma. And so the aroma filled the entire room, and everybody in the room shared in that beautiful smell. And it coated over Jesus himself. And he didn't despise that. He felt like it was being used for the purpose that was greatest, the sheer joy and the blessing of that smell. Just that. And so I think we need, as Christians, to not only see art as something that God has intended for us to engage in. It's not only something that we are to share with other people. It's also to be enjoyed completely just because God gave it to us. And ultimately, I think we can agree with David in Psalm 27:4, when he says, one thing I ask of the Lord that I will seek after, that I might dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life and gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, because he's the ultimate